Perfect. Okay, I'm going to start to share my screen. Give me 2 seconds. And if you could put a thumbs up in the camera so I can confirm you can see my slides. Anybody on camera, give me a thumbs up. Thank you. Perfect. So we're going to do 3 things in our time together. The first one is we're going to talk about the benefits of using podcasting to grow a coaching business. There are multiple ways to use podcasting. It does not always mean you have to host your own show. We're going to talk about the different areas and ways to use podcasting to grow a coaching business. The second thing is we're going to specify the key questions you need to be asking to decide if podcasting is the best fit for you. Really, what would be the strategy for podcasting to grow your business? I'm going to leave you with a tool, a free resource guide that will lay out all of these strategic questions that I recommend you use as a checklist to make the best decision for yourself and for your business. And then listing the work required if you do decide to go down a path to start podcasting more intentionally or to amplify your existing podcasting efforts. There'll be some very practical tips and tricks for how to get started or how to revitalize podcasting efforts. So these are our learning objectives. I hope that you see yourself in the right call tonight, wherever you are in the world. So I had this very lovely introduction where it was just mentioned that the Me Suite podcast is ranking top 1.5% globally. That is an important number because there are over 3 million podcasts globally. And so I use this to say that I am a normal person, just like you. I do not have a famous movie or a famous agent like Tom Cruise to help me get downloads and to help advertise the show. I am a normal person just like you, who over the last 4 years had a chance to achieve the show having a top 1.5% ranking. And you can do the same is my message. That's the point. Now, I did this on the back of starting my own show, but it's interview-based, which means I can only attribute this success to the willingness and the quality of the guests that I have been on my show that other people wanted to listen to. So you can either have your own podcast show and or you can be a guest on other people's shows, because every person who trusted me with their brand and came onto my show to be interviewed as a guest was also using podcasting to grow their business. So there are so many different ways that you can think about podcasting and the strategy and the role that it plays. And here's why this matters. It matters because podcasting is so hot across the main coaching areas of our expertise. So if you look at, here's some of the data, some of the stats around the top 10 types of podcasts that people listen to globally. This is global data. The top 10 categories for podcasting genres are on the left and the right, and the blue star are the ones that are really relevant to us as coaches. I'm assuming most of us are on the call here because of the coaching environment. So if you wanted to either have a podcast show or you wanted to be a guest on shows, society and culture. So any of you who are coaching around things like the Great Resignation, or anybody that is doing life coaching and thinking, what is my purpose? Society and culture changes are very relevant podcast genres for that type of coach. I am more of a business coach. I do executive coaching and I do business coaching. So I would be more guesting on business-oriented podcasts. Health and wellness, if any of you do health coaching and wellness coaching and general life coaching and well-being, you could either be hosting in that genre, which is a top 5 podcast genre for listeners and downloads, or you could be a guest on those types of shows. And then on the right-hand side, we have self-development, and that's, I know it's very self-explanatory, self-development podcast. So if you think about yourself as a coach, and you think about either the type of podcast show you want to host and have conversations around, or the type of show that you want to be a guest on, 4 of the top 10 podcast genres globally have a direct intersection to what you and I do. And the other data down in the middle where you see the blue and the pink heads, the global data on podcast listeners is almost 50-50 male, female. So depending on the type of podcasting conversations that you want to have, depending on the type of target audience you have for your own business, we also know that this is pretty gender neutral. This is a very gender neutral area. And I think just another piece of evidence for why you need a strategy behind the role you want podcasting to play. The answer could be no, I don't want podcasting to play a role. My wish for you is that you make that yes/no decision with intentionality. And I'm going to hopefully give you some frames for doing that today. So there are 4 ways and 4 whys for embracing podcasting here, and I'll just share them with you and certainly take questions. Podcasting will always signal who you are as a coach, whether you're the host or the guest, or whether you're just simply referring a client to a podcast. Your referral to a podcast, your guesting on a podcast, or you're hosting a podcast will always signal who you are as a coach. And that's why that intentionality and being very deliberate about those decisions is so important for your own personal brand as a coach. And when done with intention, it will differentiate you. It will build trust with you and your client. And it also leads to growth in your ideal client, because you're being much more deliberate and specific about the types of content, the types of discussions that you are either showing your own expertise or you are encouraging in others. So on my left-hand side, I have these 4 circles. I'm going to start at 12 o'clock. These are simply the 4 ways that you can interact with podcasting if you're thinking about using podcasting to grow your business. At 12 o'clock is obviously the largest effort. The largest effort in the way that you can embrace podcasting to grow your business is to be a host. And that would require you to set up the strategy, all the strategic work of deciding what is the show about, what are we going to talk about, what is the experience, the look, the feel, the branding, to all the tactical efforts of how am I going to get the recording done? How am I going to do the editing? How am I going to get a guest? So that is the most complicated, the most intense way to engage with podcasting is to be the host. At 3 o'clock on my circles, you could simply be a referral. So you can decide as a coach, there are certain podcasts in my realm that I respect, that align to my brand, and I'm going to use that as a referral and recommend episodes or shows to my client to complement my business. This is the same way you already would be recommending books. I recommend, client, that you read this book because I think it's relevant to what you're struggling with. A podcast would be no different if you become a referrer, where you decide you're going to know and study certain podcasts and use them to refer out to your clients. At 6 o'clock is the guest, where you can decide that you want a strategy around being a guest on certain podcasts that align to your vision and who you are as a coach, and making a commitment to what types of shows do I want to be a guest on because it aligns to my brand, and with what frequency. Do I want to have a coaching business strategy that I want to be a guest on a show once a month? And I want to let that be part of the way that I'm getting my own unique, differentiated coaching voice out into the community. And then once that episode is available, you can start to refer your clients to, you may want to listen to my episode where I was a guest on this show. It will help you understand who I am as a coach and my expertise in this area. So that's another way to use podcasting, is to be a guest to help differentiate yourself and build trust and lead to growth in your ideal client, because they start to learn more about who you are. And then my 4th one at 9 o'clock is sponsor. And this is probably the least involved and the one that requires the least amount of effort, but it requires money. And that is for you to sponsor a show where you could literally be a commercial, an audio commercial on an existing podcast that aligns to your core brand and your strategy, where if it is a podcaster that takes advertising dollars, you could be advertising on that particular show to help raise awareness to your business. So those are the 4 main ways to decide with intentionality how you want to engage with the podcasting format to grow your business. Podcasting also impacts the multiple variables of the trust equation. I think many of you as coaches may be familiar with the trust equation from Trust Advisors. If you go to trustedadvisor.com, you can learn more. But the other reason that I was so passionate about embracing podcasting to grow my own coaching business, and what I actually learned about trust through podcasting, can really be described in the variables in the equation. So the trust equation, if you haven't had familiarity with it, there are 4 variables. In the numerator, there's credibility, reliability, and intimacy. And in the denominator is self-orientation. And we know from math and equations, the larger the denominator gets, the lower the trust. So the more time that I'm spending on myself and my own agenda, it's me, the more I am self-oriented, the lower the trust I'm building with people, because I am diluting my credibility, my reliability, and my intimacy with that selfishness. And so it's always important to strike a balance. Well, so what? Why does this matter for coaching? So let me try to pull it together here. I have found that podcasting can be the absolute ultimate trust builder, because it does pull on the variables that we know are required to build and maintain and nurture trust. There are 2 levers in the trust equation. On the left-hand side, I have the rational levers. On the right-hand side, I have the emotional levers. And podcasting hits on all 4 of these in the following ways. I'm going to start on the left. Podcasting allows you to build credibility, whether you're the host or the guest or referring an episode to a client. Podcasting allows you to build credibility because it's a forum that allows you to show your own knowledge in the coaching space. It allows you to provide examples and experience that show you know what you're talking about, and it allows you to make more public your credentials. So just rationally, it helps you build credibility because it's another forum for you to show all that you know and all the different special, unique ways that you help. Also on the rational area, it helps with what I'll call reliability, meaning if you are deciding that you want a podcasting strategy, either as a host or as a guest, the consistency with which you are showing up, telling your stories, sharing your unique perspective on coaching in whatever special area you operate, it's another way for you to show consistently, yes, check out my episodes where I'm a guest, or check out my show. It shows that you have a reliable, consistent, predictable way that you are showing up in the universe as a coach, right? Rather than, oh, maybe once a year you post something, or I do it when I think about doing it. It's requiring you to be much more deliberate and consistent in the way that your brand and your very unique voice, literally your voice, your very unique voice is showing up in the world and being shared with other people. Then on the right-hand side, the emotional levers under intimacy, this is the one that I had to learn, and I had such an amazing aha moment. Podcasting is one of the most unique, special ways to build intimacy with someone. You're on a show as a guest, or you are hosting your own show, and by the fact that you are having a dialogue with a listener privately with their earbuds in, where they have decided to carve out 30 minutes, 45 minutes, or an hour with you, is an amazing, beautiful format for creating a sense of belonging, because you're a community who have come together to listen to this show. And there's such a sense of warmth that is created when you find that podcast that aligns to your own personal goals and your own brand and the own way you walk through the universe. And then there's also something very respectful about the podcast community. If you are a podcast listener to a particular show that you can't wait for the next episode to be downloaded, you know exactly what I mean. There really is this intimate sense of connectedness and a sense of community that is built when the podcast format and topics align and meet your needs in that moment. And what I found from podcasting as a host in this case, but I also did a lot of guesting in the beginning for practice, I find that when people go and listen to my episodes, which remember, they're all interviews with other amazing people. When people go and listen to my episodes, they start to think that they know me, because they start to understand what types of questions do I ask, what types of points of view do I have, what type of humor do I exhibit or not, who am I and how am I engaging? And they decide whether or not they like that as they're listening. They decide whether or not I'm going to be a good fit for them as they're listening. And so what this has become for me, because of the intimacy that podcasting builds, it has become a major lead generation engine for my clients. Because people, if they decide they listen to me and they don't like me, they never call me. And so by the time someone does call me, they've already decided they want to work with me. So I very rarely am doing competitive bids. I very rarely have someone that says, well, I'm interviewing other coaches. That almost never happens, because when they come to me through the podcast, they've already had a chance at no cost to them to learn from me, learn content, and also decide if I'm a good fit for them, because as you know, fit is so important in coaching. So the intimacy part of building trust. I find podcasting to just be so unique in its ability to help us as coaches differentiate and find our right target client. And then lastly, on the emotional level, the denominator in the trust formula was self-orientation, where I mentioned the higher our self-orientation, the lower the trust. And what podcasting allows us to do is help other people. And that's probably why you were interested in coaching to begin with, that you are naturally wired to be in service of other people. And podcasting as an industry is where people come together in a very selfless manner to share their expertise and to engage. And it is a real wonderful forum for allowing yourself to share your knowledge and expertise in a very low self-orientation manner, because almost all podcasts are free. You're not doing this to make money. You're not doing this to charge a fee, yet you are out there bringing your content and your knowledge and your expertise in service of other people and engaging in a very intimate manner. So I started off with data about why the podcasting industry is relevant as coaches, because the genres of podcasting are very aligned to coaching. And now I'm showing more from a more qualitative manner. I'm showing the trust formula to give evidence to why podcasting can be such an enormous trust builder. And we all know as coaches how important trust is. It's really all we have. So now let me get a little bit more tactical. Where on earth would we get started? Podcasting for business growth requires making business decisions. And so what I've created for you here, which I'll have as a leave behind for you, you can use it in any way that is helpful. I have created for you a podcasting guide with the main strategic questions that you need to ask from a business perspective to decide if podcasting makes sense for you and your business. If you're a guest on a podcast, it doesn't cost you any money, but it does cost you time. If you're going to be hosting, it will cost you time and money. If you're a sponsor, it will cost you money. And if you're just referring out to someone, just like you refer people to books, that doesn't cost you any money either, but it does take time. And so I believe as business owners, if you're trying to grow a business, you're needing to make very strategic decisions about where you spend your time and money. And I'm hoping that these questions help you do just that. I have them in 3 columns. I've got questions in the strategic planning area where we ask the why, the what, and the when of how we would be engaging with podcasting. There's then the second column, which is all around this host and guest engagement, the who and the where. This is true whether you're going to be a host or a guest. We need to be very strategic about deciding where do we want to show up, because you need to be showing up in a consistent manner, in a manner that is consistent with the brand that you want to be building as a coach. And maybe you already have a brand. So this is more about enforcing, making sure you're reinforcing your current brand in a consistent manner. And then on the right-hand column, I have questions around the how. And this is all around the development of the podcast and the distribution of the podcast. This right-hand column will be more relevant to you if you're thinking about hosting your own podcast. However, podcasting is a very crowded industry, and it's a little flooded. That's a polite way to say polluted. It's a little polluted, meaning anybody can have a podcast. All you need is a microphone and a table and maybe a quiet place. So I do encourage you, even though the right-hand side is more about if you want to be a host, these are some questions you can be asking yourself if you want to be a guest. So as you're out there looking at other people's shows and deciding if you want to be affiliated with those shows as a guest, critique them based on these questions. How are they doing with their own brand naming and their logo and their music and their website and the distribution channels that they're using? Are they putting energy into their podcast in a manner that you would be proud to be affiliated with? Because again, it's your brand. So I'm going to skip to the next slide here, but we are going to continue to come back to this checklist. I'm going to give you a link where you can download this as a PDF if you wanted to be using this afterwards, as you continue to make these strategic decisions about podcasting for your business. So I showed you the circle before about the many different ways that we can think about engaging in podcasting. And there are really 4, I call them waves, that you can decide to ride, which I mentioned before: host my own show, refer clients to an existing podcast, be interviewed on someone else's show, or advertise my business on a show. You will get a lot of advice from a lot of people who are very well-meaning. They are nice people, but there's a lot of bad advice out there about podcasting. And so I want to share with you what I've learned over the last 4 years, what I call well-meaning bad business advice in podcasting. So I'm going to go left to right. A lot of people will say, just get on a show and be a guest and get out there and do it just to try it. While I understand the spirit, and I do want to encourage people to take risks, my caution is you get one chance to make a first impression. So if you're thinking about being a guest on a show, be very strategic about, is that truly a brand that I want to be affiliated with? How does the host treat the guest? Do you believe that the show is at a level of professionalism that you would be proud to be affiliated with? And are they going to allow you as a guest to land the messages that you want to be landing so that it helps either enrich your personal brand or help you grow your business? The second piece of bad advice that I hear all the time was, don't overthink it, just dive in. And again, you only, especially in coaching, you really only have your personal brand. And so I would be very, very specific about who is your target client and who are you trying to attract through podcasting, so that all the decisions you're making, you're keeping that target client at the center of those decisions. The third piece of very bad advice I received was, it's fine to do everything on your own, meaning get that microphone, set yourself up in your basement. There's nothing wrong with doing that. However, be intentional. There are some parts of podcasting where you may not be an expert, and let the experts be the experts. If you know you want to be editing your show and it takes you 3 hours to edit because you're not an editing expert, hire an editing expert, please. Because remember, you're a coach first and foremost, and you want to be keeping your eye on the strategy of your business, and you want to be keeping your eye on the clients. So if you are getting serious about, especially hosting, if you're getting serious about hosting, I highly encourage you to decide, what budget do you maybe want to put aside to launch your podcast? Let's say you want to do 12 episodes. I'm making up the number. But figure out what budget would be required for you to run, for example, 1 season, having experts be experts to help you have the audio quality that you want to have, the editing quality that you want to have, the equipment that you need in your space for professional production, and let experts be experts if you're just trying to launch that business. Because again, you get one chance to make a first impression, and you've got a business to run and probably don't need to be editing audio. So some people will say it's fine to be doing everything on your own in your basement. But if you are running a coaching business and you have a personal brand, every single way you show up signals what that brand is. And if you have poor audio quality and you have poor editing or no editing at all, because it was just too time consuming to do it, that erodes your brand. So just be extremely self-aware about the limits of your skills. And I would highly encourage you to invest in the beginning and let experts be experts to help you show up in the best way that you can. Otherwise, I'm not sure if it's going to be worth the effort. The fourth bad piece of advice I got was it's all about the downloads. There's a lot of podcasters who measure their self-worth on how many podcast downloads I received. And as a coach, that's not really what matters the most. What matters the most for you is there some call to action where the listener decides to become a customer of yours, or where the listener goes and shares your name with other people who become clients of yours. So if you're trying to podcast for business growth, it's not about the downloads, meaning quantity. It's about, are the right people downloading and listening, and then making a decision to work with you or refer you as a coach. So again, whenever we have a business strategy or a strategic plan, we're always thinking about what is the metric that we're going to measure ourselves on. And so I just encourage you in podcasting, for business growth, the metric is not always number of downloads. The metric is more about, am I getting the right people to listen, and are they turning into clients, or at least client referrals? Another piece of bad advice I received was, do whatever you want. It's your own show. You can do whatever you want. No, you can't. Make sure that authenticity doesn't mean that you're lazy. There's a lot of podcasters who say they don't want to edit because I'm just going to be myself and I'm just going to ramble and say whatever I want. And they'll call that authentic. But I call that a little lazy if you're not careful in preparing. What do I want to discuss on my show? How precise do I want to be? Does my listener want to listen to under 30 minutes? What kind of listener do I even have? Should my episodes be 15 minutes because my target audience is get in and get out? Or do I typically get an audience that listens to me on their treadmill, and so I'm going to do a 45-minute episode? So while I appreciate authenticity, that you don't want to sound so rehearsed that you're a robot, doing whatever you want with your show, if you're trying to run a business from the show, is probably a bad idea and requires a little bit more precision, intentionality, and just make sure that authenticity is not an excuse for being a little bit lazy and cutting corners in your preparation. And then the last piece of well-meaning, wonderful people who had bad business advice in podcasting was, don't worry about being perfect. It depends on who your target audience is, the degree of perfection that you're going to have in an episode. So if I, for example, interview a lot of CEOs on my podcast and a lot of C-suite leaders in general. And I, sometimes, we'll have a guest on my show who will, a lot in the interview. And I have to edit all of that, because I know that if my guest hears how much they are stumbling and using filler words, they will not feel proud of their performance. And if they do not feel proud of their performance, they're not going to tell anyone to listen to it. So depending on the type of audience that you're interviewing, let that determine how much you want the conversation to sound like two buddies chatting outside on a bench, versus it needs to have a little bit more polish that will require a little bit more editing. So bad advice is, don't worry about being perfect. Good advice is, decide the degree of perfection you're going to need based on respect for your guest and for your target audience. So I'm hoping that these are making a little bit of sense. Let me check the chat. I see some stuff pumping in here. Oh, these are good questions. Okay, give me just a moment. Let me check them. I'm going to scroll up just a second. Let me see who I've missed. Okay, so I've got a few questions here about podcasting, just generically, what is it and does it include video? So let me start there. So podcasting today shows up in two main ways. There is podcasting that is audio only. And so that would be a downloadable audio file, typically from services like Spotify, Apple Podcast. Those are the two biggest players. And then we also now have video being added to podcasts on the platform called Spotify and YouTube. Most podcasts today are audio only. They are starting to add video if you're going through YouTube or Spotify. And video adds a whole new layer of complexity. Because if you decide to do video, you are having to edit both the visual audio, the visual feed and the audio feed. So if I'm having to edit out ums because of one of my guests, I've got to edit both the audio file and the video file. So it adds a whole new layer of complexity for editing if you decide to also have video. Also, demographically, the video listeners to podcasts tend to be a younger demographic. Right now, anyway, that could always be changing. And the podcast audio only listeners tend to be an older demographic, tend to be at 40 plus. So depending on your target client, you may not need video because it wouldn't be downloaded and watched anyway. So a little bit of this will be decided in the strategic questions that I gave you, of really understanding who is my target audience and where will they be more likely to be listening, and do they want audio only or do they also want video? I do not do video, and I do not do video for two main reasons. Number one, because of the editing complexity, and I decided that I would edit every single episode, because my target audience is a professional audience and my interviewed guests are all C-suite people. And I knew that they would expect a certain level of professionalism in order for an episode to be approved, to be posted and shared. So I decided, for my purpose, which may not be right for you, I decided for my purpose, I would have more professional polish in the final version. And for that reason, I decided to go podcast audio only. I also found that my guests didn't want to be on video. And it was easier for me to get the guests that I wanted if I was audio only. That's going to be different for some of you, depending on your strategy, depending on your target audience, and depending on the experience that you're trying to have. My goal, my wish for you is that you just make that decision very informed and very intentionally. There's not a right or wrong answer. There's just, have I been intentional and have I done my homework? So the other question I had here, if perfection is part of your personality, what do you do? Okay, so maybe this person likes perfection. I think I'm reading this correctly. I think perfection can be a great thing. It's just, remember that if you wanted to have a podcast where you wanted people to feel that you were the man on the street and you could just walk up to me at the bus sign and ask me any question at all, you probably don't want your episode to feel overproduced. You want it to feel spontaneous. You want it to have mistakes in it. But I can't tell you what's right or wrong unless I know what experience you're trying to have with your listener. Hope that makes sense. Okay, so let me scroll down. I got a few more questions here. Let's see. Whether podcast is a coaching interview. I'm not sure. If you want to type back in again, I think this was Sandeep. I'm not sure what the question is here. Whether podcast is a coaching interview. If you've got another question in there, just type it in and I'll watch for it in the chat. Okay, I'm going to go to the next slide here. Okay, how to get started. So my first recommendation is to join podcasting social media forums. These can come through on things like WeChat, WhatsApp, Facebook. There's many, many different ways to get in the different geographies that you live in. The more common platforms, these are social media platforms where podcasters come together to talk to each other and share ideas. Buzzsprout, Podfam, Podmatch, those are the ones that I typically go to. And I sometimes go to just look secretly at what are the conversations. And sometimes I post questions. Sometimes I post advice. It's just a community of experienced and novice podcasters coming together to share ideas. So just start there, and it's free. And it's a great way for you to, again, start to answer these strategic questions that I'm encouraging you to ask yourself. Listen to podcasts broadly. Go and listen to podcasts in the universe to decide what you like, what you don't like, what works for you, because you'll start to learn what you like in other people's work that you may want to replicate, and you'll decide what you don't think works at all. And you're like, I don't want to do it that way. And this isn't just coaching podcasts. I would go listen as broadly as you possibly can. And I'll give you some examples of some of my favorites here in just a moment. There is a quick reference guide, that the little checklist with all the questions that I shared, that will be available to you in this presentation. And Aishwarya, you had a link to this that you could post in the chat. Is that right? Are you able to post that in the chat for me?
Yeah, sure.
Oh, that's perfect. So in the chat will be the link to that PDF that I mentioned that had all the strategic questions on it. And you can just go access that. It's a free resource for you. And then if you do have this PDF version, you can click the link here and download it, but it'll be here in the chat in a second. The fourth thing that I would encourage you to do is, if you find a podcast that you're interested in being a guest on, the greatest way to do that is to contact them. And you contact the host, and usually their information will be in the podcast app, or they may have a website, and they'll have an email where you can contact them. And you contact them and you say something like the following: I listened to your show. I found episode ABC particularly inspiring. I think that my point of view on the topic of ABC could be very relevant for your audience. Could I possibly be a guest on your show? So in order to be a guest on a person's show, I recommend you listen to their show. You find something that you like, respect, and we'd be proud to be a part of, and let the guest know that. Let the host know why you believe you would be a good fit for their style and their target audience. And then if they're looking for guests, then you've given them a little bit of information about how you can help be relevant to their audience. And then you'll probably have a prep call, and then you'll get on the books and you'll record. In my experience, it can take 2 to 6 months from the time someone says, yes, be a guest on my show, to you prepping, recording, and it posting. It's not fast. This can literally take up to 6 months for that whole cycle to play out, because you've got to get on their recording schedule and be part of their release schedule, and you don't know what timing that is. So if you think you want guesting, being a guest, to be part of your business growth strategy, start now contacting hosts, because those episodes may not be live for you for months and months and months for you to use in your social media, for you to use to share with clients or prospective clients. There's a pretty good lead time on getting those episodes up and running. So I would start that now if of interest, just so you can take advantage of the lead time it takes. And then I'm often personally asked, what are my favorite podcasts? And so I wanted to share with you a few, and I've given you here a few that are my favorites for content, format, professionalism, and consistency. The first one is Hidden Brain, and this one is more of a Hidden Brain, I believe, is sponsored by National Public Radio, and it's more of a podcast about neuroscience. And every episode is about some different research from neuroscience, where they talk about some particular behavior or pattern, and they interview people who have struggled with that particular area. And it's just so professionally done, and it's very science-based in the neuroscience arena. I use this one in particular to help me as a neuroscience-based coach, and it's brilliantly done and extremely professional. Serial, ear hustle, wrongful conviction. All of those are more public interest podcast. And I have fully enjoyed, first of all, the topic. A lot of the topics here are around wrongful conviction in the US penal system. And I just have a personal interest around that from some personal family experience. And it's has nothing to do with coaching. So while some people might go out and listen to a podcast about cricket and football, I go listen to a podcast about wrongful conviction. But even if you don't like the content, the format, the professionalism, and the consistency with which they show up, I learned so much from that when I was trying to decide, how did I want to have a podcast? I took lessons from them to make my own decisions for my own business with the Me Suite show. So maybe that'll give you some ideas of things that you might want to go and download. And then if you go out there and you find other podcasts that you like, that you want to share, I would love to hear from you. I'm always looking for new shows to listen to. I am a podcast junkie myself. So I would love to hear which ones you find particularly relevant for you, and I can learn from you too. So this is my end of my regularly scheduled programming. My theme is that every day in podcasting is an experiment. So have a mindset around that you're never going to know exactly what resonates. I sometimes post an episode that I think is going to break the internet, and it maybe gets 200 downloads. And then I'll post an episode that I thought was, whatever, it'll be fun, and it'll get thousands and thousands of downloads. I'm always wrong. I have never quite gotten the formula completely right about the things that I find most interesting, but my audience found something different. So I would just have that mindset that be intentional but remember to be flexible, because every day in podcasting is an experiment. And I hope you enjoy the ride. I'm going to go off sharing just so I can see all of your beautiful faces, and we have plenty of time to take a few more questions. So let me get into the chat for just a moment. Oh, Joe Rogan too. That's right. Joe Rogan is probably the most famous podcaster in the world. He does video and audio. He's also one of the only podcasters in the world who is paid to podcast. That's his full-time job. He is paid to podcast, and maybe that'll be you too. He's on exclusive on Spotify if you want to go check him out. Okay. All right, hold on. I'm going up to, the Freakonomics. Yes. Yeah. Freakonomics Radio is another great one. I don't know Andrew Huberman. I'm going to check that out. You said it's a science-based tools. I love that recommendation. Wonderful. Sakanya likes Hidden Brain also. Oh, these are wonderful. Okay, thank you for those recommendations. So any other questions? We do have the time. I don't think I see any other. Tim Ferriss show. Oh, you guys are great. Yeah. All right, you're out there with the classics. Tim Ferriss is another great show that I also personally learned a lot from when I was trying to decide how I wanted the introduction of an episode and the exit. That's called intro and outro. I actually used the Tim Ferriss show to help me decide how I wanted to do the intro and the outro of each of my episodes. I learned a lot from him. Okay, so here's a question for Priya. What about Spotify to upload your podcasts? Meaning, can you? What is the question? Do you want to come off mute maybe?
Hi. Yeah, thanks, Donna.
Yeah.
You mentioned a few places where we can upload the podcast.
Yeah.
So I was talking about Spotify also.
Yeah, absolutely. You absolutely can use Spotify to upload as well. It's a competitor to, for example, Buzzsprout. There are many different competitors in this space. Spotify is the one that has taken over the planet. So it's the one that is the most universal. In terms of downloads for listeners, though, so sorry, let me back up because I'm making it more confusing. As a podcaster, Spotify is probably the most popular platform, right, for the uploading and making yourself available. But there are other podcast services where you can make your show available on all platforms. So my show is available on about 12 or 15 different podcast platforms, not just Spotify. So if you're uploading on Spotify, you're only uploading on Spotify. So I use Buzzsprout because it allows my show to be on all platforms, because I actually found my greatest listener base is on Apple Podcasts, not on Spotify. So, and that's probably just because of the demographic of my listeners. But I get 80% of my listeners from Apple Podcast, and I only have 10% coming from Spotify. But I think it's a demographic issue. Spotify tends to skew a little bit younger, and my listener base is 40 plus. So that's probably one of the reasons. But absolutely, Spotify is a choice, and a fantastic choice. Oh, here's another Manish.
I have a question.
Oh, please jump in. Whose voice is that?
Yeah, that's me. Donna, yeah, this is Sagar.
Okay, wonderful.
Yeah, so my question was about the format of a podcast. So is it okay to have multiple formats under the same podcast, as in, let's say, a monologue versus a dialogue, and a speech versus, let's say, a book review or a point of view on a movie or something like that? So do these hybrid modes, do they work well, or is it okay to stick to one format?
Yeah, it's a great question. So again, I think here is where the word consistency takes on a new flavor. So if you knew that you were going to have a show, and I'm gonna make it up and say it's about leadership, okay? Mm-hmm. If you knew you were going to have a show about leadership, you could consistently have a program where every Monday it's a monologue, and every Tuesday it's an interview, and every Wednesday I do a book review, and every Thursday I talk about a movie relevant to leadership. And if you did that with consistency, your listener knows who you are and what your format is. Where it's a problem is if the listener has been listening with you and they really like you and they're used to your thing, and you're consistently doing the interview, and they're always 30 minutes. And then one day you do a 2-hour monologue. That is not consistent, and you might risk, you might either delight people or you might make them go, wait a minute, what is this? This isn't the show I thought it was. So I would just be intentional about what is your format. And if your format is that you do different things, one day I interview, one day I do a book review, one day I'm a monologue, your listener starts to learn that that's what this show is about. Does that make sense?
Yes, totally.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, but if you're going to be talking about different topics, I would have different shows. So I wouldn't mix topics. I wouldn't on one day be about leadership and on the other day you're about cricket.
Sure.
Right. So that, unless you're giving a story about cricket because it's an analogy for leadership.
Sure.
So yeah, but format can be different as long as that's intentional and your audience knows to expect it for a reason. Make sense?
Gotcha. Yeah. Yes. Thank you so much.
Of course. Yeah. Anybody else with a question?
You all can come off mute and please ask questions.
Sure. Got to ask me something really tough that I don't know how to answer. Make it hard. Anybody want to know how to get guests? That's usually a question I get. How do you get guests?
Donna, I'll ask a question that'll lead more into storytelling. What is one of the biggest surprises that you've had in the experience over the last few years that you had no clue would be because of the podcast?
Wow, that gives me chill bumps.
You asked for a hard one. Come on.
Yeah, no, but I'm going to love talking about the answer. So that gives me chill bumps. So I had a couple of moments in this 4-year journey where I just fell in love with humanity. Is probably the easiest way to say it. As I mentioned before, I'm a guest-based podcast. So my podcast relies on my ability to get other people to come on my show and tell their unique story. And what I really learned, which will sound obvious when I say it, but I promise you it was an aha moment for me. Every person has a unique story that is relevant to it, even though it's unique, it is relevant to another person. And the ability for my podcast to be a forum that allowed a person to tell their unique story, the moment I had the realization of the power of that podcast platform to let a unique story be heard, I just wanted to cry with joy. It was just it was so inspiring to know, first, that someone would trust me with their story, but secondly, that all these unique stories are so relevant to other people. And every single moment that I have thought to myself, and there's been 4 moments in the middle of I'm in season 5 right now. And in the middle of every season, I've had a moment of, should I continue? Do I continue the show? Every single moment I have had that question to myself. Some random stranger has emailed me, because my email's on my website. Some random stranger has emailed me and said, I just heard your episode with guest XYZ and it changed my life. Or I just heard your interview with that person and that's exactly what I needed to hear right now. Or thank you so much for letting that story come out. That interview with ABC was so inspiring. From a total stranger. So that's another, this was Lisa asking the question, I believe. Yeah. Those moments, you will have those moments if you decide that you want to host your own podcast platform. And you'll also have those moments if you're a guest on other shows. Because when I hear from people, oh my gosh, that changed my life, or I needed to hear that today, they're not contacting me to say, they're contacting me because of the guest. They're contacting me because of the guest that I interviewed and the questions that I asked that drew out that amazing thing. And that can be you too. So, and I think as coaches, we're even more uniquely suited for this platform because we are uniquely wired to want to be helpful to other people. And we are inherently good question askers. And I think that those skills are a wonderful formula for what the podcast forum has to offer. Is that okay, Lisa? Was that a good?
Of course it was okay. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Donna, can I ask you a question?
Please.
I'm a podcaster myself, and
Wonderful.
we've done 5 seasons.
Oh, look at you. All right, we're sisters.
Is there any one guest who has remained your favorite?
Ooh, okay. Now you know better than anybody that guests are like children.
Yeah.
And you're not allowed to have a favorite.
I knew that's going to be your answer. But
Yeah.
a guest who kind of really touched you emotionally.
Yeah. Well, I do have an answer to that question. There, again, some more aha moments. There was a guest that I interviewed, and I had known this man for 25 years. We had gone to school together. I had sat in classes with him every single day for 2 years. I mean, I thought I knew this person. And he's now a CEO at a company and doing wonderful, wonderful things. And so I asked him a favor and I said, will you please come onto the show and talk about your journey? And I thought it was going to be kind of this generic, typical story of, how I worked hard and I persevered and I got a good job. I just thought it would be kind of generic because I knew him. I thought I knew him. Well, he came onto the show and he started to tell all these stories about how he had flunked out of college, how twice. And first of all, I was shocked that he was telling people this because I was never aware that this was part of his fabric. And so I was just really touched that he felt so comfortable being vulnerable on the show, number one. But it also was one of my most favorite episodes because I had that moment of, Donna, you think you know someone. No, you don't. Right? You don't fully, especially if it's a professional relationship where you've just worked together for a long time. We don't always really know and appreciate what are all those things that happened way before I met you. that shaped who you are, and those family inheritances that have shaped the type of leader that we are. And so it became it's probably my, I'll call it favorite episode, because it was a moment of, it just made me think very, very differently about what it really means to know somebody.
Thank you. Beautiful.
Yeah. So I think we're out of time, and we probably need to do a proper close. Is that correct?
Donna, sorry, we just have, I think, a few questions in the chat box.
Oh, let me look real quick. We've got
Yes.
2 minutes. Oh, thank you, Farah. That's so nice. Farah wrote a note about trust, that I created trust that allowed that person to be vulnerable. So thank you. Let's see. I'm scrolling up to see I missed some person. How did you get your first guest? I called in a favor. and you will too. So I do recommend when if you're trying to get guests, or you're thinking about having a guest-based show, you always start with people that know you and trust you, and you call in a favor, and you ask if they would be willing to come on the show, but give them enough knowledge that they understand how you're going to respect their brand. I respected brand by editing every episode and giving people a chance to hear it before it posted. I let every guest hear my final edited episode before it posts, so that they can make a last minute change if it's important for them to do so. Of my almost 275 interviews, I've only had 2 people request an additional edit. But I think just by asking and giving people the comfort that they can, you're more likely to get the guests you want, because they feel more protected. But as with all things in life, you're probably first going to lean on people and call in favors, and just always give people a graceful no, right? If they don't want to do it, or they feel uncomfortable doing it, or they feel like it's not the quite right time, always give them a graceful no. There's one question about sponsors, but we're out of time. So what do you recommend?
If you don't mind continuing and our viewers don't, then
Okay.
great.
Okay. I'll take this as the last one, the question about sponsors. So sponsors are just like radio stations or television, where you buy an ad, and that ad would be an ad for your business that's recorded usually about 15 seconds. It's really short, and you would have it inserted into a particular show. If that show does not get millions of downloads, it's probably not worth advertising on. Podcasting is typically not a place people make money, unless you're Joe Rogan. You're doing it more as a content-rich marketing budget. You can go advertise generically in a magazine, or you can take that money and go advertise where people can hear your voice and hear some content from you. So I'm not, I need to come clean on my bias. I'm not a fan of sponsorships, because as a podcast listener, I don't like to get interrupted with ads. So I typically don't listen to the ads when they come on the podcast, because I'm annoyed. So just investigate sponsorships and decide if it's right for you. But it's not a big money maker. You may at the most make $20 to $50 a year from it. I mean, it's rounding error, but it is an option, and it is something to explore, but just keep eyes wide open. Okay. Thank you,
so much.
everybody.
Donna, I just have one quick question for you.
Okay.
Thank you. I never knew there is so much in podcasting.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful, such a very nice, and you've been so authentic. I want to learn about this more in detail. Do we get an access to your podcasting sessions? Is that possible?
Do you mean my episodes, the show?
Yes.
Yeah. If you go to, I'm going to type it in the chat just so you can get the spelling. If you go to the Me Suite, oh, sorry, I didn't do it to everybody. Sorry, let me retype it. The Me Suite. The name of my show is called The Me Suite. It's available on all podcast apps. If you've ever listened to a podcast ever, it will be wherever you got that. You also can download them on my website, which is this link here, themesuite.com. And you can get them off of my website also just by clicking the podcast button. So start there. And if you have any feedback on them, I would love to hear it. Yeah. And if any of you start a show or go guest on a show, send me a link to the episode, because I will listen, I will like it, I will give a review. Let me know how to support you if you go off on that journey.
That's really sweet of you, Donna. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, everybody, for attending the webinar today. Thank you so much, Donna. It was a very, very resourceful and wonderful webinar. I mean, you can just go through the chats and everybody's saying the same thing.
This is great. Thank you. I appreciate it. And whatever it is you want out there, I hope you get it. I wish you well.